The handcuffs bit into Maya's wrists with a cold, metallic finality. But it wasn't the steel that hurt. It was the sound of Kratos' soul breaking. Her 85-pound Malinois, a beast who had stared down insurgent fire in the ruins of Mosul, was now trembling, his chest vibrating with a whimper that echoed across the gravel like a death knell. Sheriff Silas stood over them, a smug grin plastered across his face, thinking he'd finally broken the woman who dared to stand tall in his town. He had no idea he wasn't just arresting a civilian. He was pulling the pin on a grenade that had been forged in the fires of the Navy SEALs. This was no longer a routine stop. It was the beginning of a war he couldn't possibly win. Before we dive into the heart of this storm, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story of justice being served. Also, drop a comment below letting us know which city or country you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories of courage travel across the globe. The dust of Silver Creek didn't taste like the sand of the Middle East, but the tension in the air felt exactly the same. Maya Phoenix Vance adjusted the rearview mirror of her weathered pickup, her eyes catching the steady, intelligent gaze of Kratos in the passenger seat. "Almost there, buddy," she murmured, her voice a low rasp. "Just a place to breathe. That's all we need." Kratos chuffed, a heavy sound of agreement, but his ears remained pricked. He felt the shift in the atmosphere before she did. Silver Creek was a postcard-perfect mountain town on the surface, but Maya's 15 years in naval special warfare had taught her to look for the baseline. And the baseline here was wrong. The first mini-climax hit when she pulled into Maggie's diner. As Maya stepped out, she noticed a black and white cruiser idling at the far end of the lot. The officer inside didn't look away when she made eye contact. He stared with a predatory, territorial hunger. "Stay close," Maya whispered to Kratos. Inside, the diner went silent the moment the bell above the door chimed. It wasn't the silence of curiosity. It was the silence of fear. Maya sat in a corner booth, Kratos melting into the shadows beneath the table like a professional. "Coffee, black," Maya told the waitress, whose hands were shaking so hard the saucer rattled. "You're new," the waitress whispered, her eyes darting toward the window. "You should probably keep moving. This isn't a friendly stop for strangers." "I'm just passing through," Maya said, her voice steady. "That's what they all say until Silas decides he likes your truck more than you do," the woman replied, scurrying away. The first major twist occurred 10 minutes later when the door swung open and Sheriff Silas walked in, followed by his deputy, a man named Miller, who looked like he enjoyed pulling wings off flies. Silas didn't go to the counter. He walked straight to Maya's booth and loomed over her. "I don't remember issuing a permit for an aggressive animal in my diner," Silas barked. Maya didn't blink. "He's a service dog, and he's not aggressive. He's disciplined." "Is that right?" Silas smiled, a slow, greasy movement of his lips. He tilted his coffee cup, letting the scalding liquid splash inches from Kratos' paws. Kratos didn't move, not a muscle. But a low, subsonic growl started in his chest, a sound that made the hair on the back of Maya's neck stand up. "He looks like he's thinking about biting a law enforcement officer," Miller sneered, hand resting on his holster. "That's a death sentence for a dog in this county." "He's thinking about how much he dislikes the smell of cheap coffee," Maya countered, her heart rate remaining a cool 60 beats per minute. "Maybe watch where you're pouring." The diner held its collective breath. No one spoke to Silas like that. The sheriff leaned down, his face inches from hers, smelling of stale tobacco and unearned ego. You think you're tough because you've got a big dog and a military jacket? Silas hissed. In Silver Creek, I'm the judge, the jury, and the man who decides if you leave town in your truck or in a pine box. Respect is earned. Sheriff, Maya said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet level. Not demanded from people you're supposed to protect. Silas straightened up, laughing harshly. We'll see how much respect you have when you're walking back to the highway on foot. As they walked out, Maya felt the first hook of the narrative dig in. She wasn't just being bullied, she was being scouted. Over the next hour of narrative time, the harassment escalated into a tactical psychological operation. Maya found her tires slashed outside her rental cabin. When she called the station, Miller answered, laughing before hanging up. Later that evening, a brick was thrown through her window with a note attached. Leave or the dog dies. Maya sat in the dark, cleaning her old service pistol, not because she intended to use it, but because the ritual gave her clarity. Kratos laid his head on her lap, his intelligent eyes watching her. They think we're prey, Kratos, she whispered. Yeah, and they've forgotten what happens when you corner a predator. The second major twist happened the following morning at the town's only gas station. As Maya was filling her tank, 3 cruisers boxed her in. Silas stepped out, wearing a tactical vest as if he were headed into a war zone. We've had reports of a dog matching this description attacking a child in the park, Silas lied, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. He hasn't left my side, Maya said, stepping in front of Kratos. Search the truck, Silas ordered Miller. You don't have a warrant, Maya stated, her body shifting into a combat-ready stance. I have probable cause, Silas countered, stepping into her personal space. And if you interfere, I'll add resisting arrest and assaulting an officer to your list of problems. Miller tossed the truck, throwing Maya's belongings into the dirt. He pulled out a small, plastic baggie of white powder from under the driver's seat, a blatant plant. Well, look at that, Miller grinned, intent to distribute. You're pathetic, Maya said, her voice devoid of fear, which clearly infuriated Silas. Cuff her, Silas barked. As Miller grabbed her arms, Kratos lunged. He didn't bite, but his bark was like a thunderclap in the small lot. Down, Maya commanded, her voice like a whip. Kratos stopped mid-air, landing on all 4 paws and vibrating with suppressed fury. Put the dog down, Miller screamed, drawing his weapon and aiming it directly at Kratos' head. No, Maya yelled, her composure finally breaking at the sight of the barrel leveled at her partner. Kratos, stay, stay. The dog looked at her, his eyes filled with an agonizing confusion. Every instinct he possessed told him to tear the throat out of the man threatening his human. But the one thing stronger than his instinct was his loyalty to her command. He sat. He began to whine, a high-pitched, heartbreaking sound of a warrior forced to watch his commander fall. Good boy, Maya choked out as the steel ratcheted shut on her wrists. As Silas shoved her into the back of the cruiser, he leaned in and whispered, I'm going to enjoy watching them put that beast to sleep while you watch from a cell. Maya looked him dead in the eye, a cold smile touching her lips. You made one mistake, Silas. You assumed I came here alone? The cruiser pulled away, leaving Kratos sitting alone in the dust, his eyes fixed on the receding taillights, his heart breaking in a way that no combat zone had ever managed to achieve. Silas thought he had won. He had no idea that Kratos' service harness wasn't just leather and nylon. It was housing a military-grade, encrypted uplink that had just broadcast the entire encounter to a secure server at the Pentagon. The war had officially begun, and Silver Creek was about to find out exactly what happens when you bully a Navy SEAL. The heavy door of the interrogation room slammed shut with a sound like a gunshot, leaving Maya in a dim space that smelled of damp concrete and the unwashed arrogance of men who thought they were gods. Silas didn't sit down. He paced the perimeter like a hyena circling a trapped lion, his boots clicking rhythmically against the floor. He leaned over the table, his shadow stretching long and distorted across Maya's face. But she didn't flinch, her gaze fixed on a point just past his left ear. "You think that silence makes you look tough, don't you?" Silas sneered, his voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. "But in this room, silence is just a confession waiting to happen." Maya finally shifted her eyes to meet his, a cold, clinical stare that had unnerved warlords in the Hindu Kush. "I've been interrogated by professionals, Sheriff," she said, her voice like grinding stones. "You're just a bully with a shiny piece of tin." Silas's face flushed a deep, ugly purple, and he slammed his fist onto the metal table, the vibration rattling the very air in the room. He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and malice. "That tin gives me the right to make sure you never see the sun again. And it gives me the right to decide what happens to that mongrel of yours." Outside, in the cramped hallway of the station, Miller was struggling with a power he didn't understand. Kratos sat in the back of the animal control van, his body a statue of muscle and vibrating tension. He wasn't barking. He was watching the station door with a terrifying, singular focus that made Miller's hand shake as he reached for the latch. "Stupid dog," Miller muttered, trying to bolster his own fading courage. "You're going to the shelter, and if you even show a tooth, I'll put a slug in your head myself." He yanked the door open, expecting the dog to cower or lunge. Instead, Kratos simply stepped out, his movements fluid and silent as a ghost. The dog didn't look at Miller. He looked at the building where Maya was being held, his intelligent eyes scanning for weaknesses in the structure. Miller felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This wasn't a dog. It was a weapon system in fur. He tried to pull the lead, but Kratos didn't budge, his weight anchoring him to the earth like an oak tree. "I said move!" Miller shouted, his voice cracking with a fear he couldn't hide from the townspeople watching from the sidewalk. Back in the room, Silas pulled a folder from his belt and tossed it onto the table. "We found more than just powder in your truck, Phoenix," he lied, his grin returning. "We found evidence of a conspiracy. You're not just a drifter. You're a threat to national security." Maya almost laughed, the sound dry and hollow. "You're reaching, Silas. You're desperate because you know your little kingdom is built on sand." Silas stepped back, his eyes narrowing. "It doesn't matter what I know. It matters what the judge sees. And in Silver Creek, the judge is my brother-in-law." He leaned down, whispering, "I'm going to take everything from you. Your truck, your dignity, and that dog's life. Especially the dog." Maya's heart rate spiked, not from fear for herself, but from a primal protective instinct. She leaned forward as much as the cuffs would allow. "If you touch him, there won't be enough of you left for a funeral." Silas laughed, a harsh, grating sound, but before he could respond, the station's lights flickered and died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. The major twist hit like a physical blow when a muffled explosion echoed from the parking lot. In the sudden pitch black, Silas scrambled for his flashlight, his bravado evaporating in an instant. "Miller!" What was that? He screamed into his radio, but only static answered him. Maya sat perfectly still in the dark, her training taking over. She didn't need light to know where the exits were. She had mapped them the moment she walked in. Out in the lot, the animal control van was engulfed in flames, the heat blistering the paint of the nearby cruisers. In the chaos of the fire, Kratos had vanished. Miller was screaming, Ma running toward the station with his hands over his head as if he were being hunted. "He's out! The dog is out!" Miller yelled as he burst through the front doors. The townspeople, who had been cowed for years, began to move closer, the fire reflecting in their eyes that were starting to lose their fear and replace it with a dangerous curiosity. In the darkness of the interrogation room, Maya felt a cold draft as the door was kicked open. A silhouette stood there, but it wasn't a deputy. It was a man in civilian clothes, moving with the silent efficiency of an operator. "Commander," the man whispered. Maya relaxed her shoulders. "Bravo 6, you're late." The man knelt and made quick work of the cuffs with a shim. "Traffic was a nightmare in the mountains. We've got the uplink stabilized. The Department of Justice has the feed, and the governor's office just signed the emergency warrant for Silas's arrest." Maya stood up, rubbing her wrists. "Where's Kratos?" "He's doing exactly what he was trained to do," the man replied. "He's cutting off their escape." Silas, finally finding his flashlight, swung the beam toward the door. "Who the hell are you? Get on the ground." The man didn't move, the light reflecting off the barrel of a suppressed sidearm. "Sheriff, you're currently being recorded by 3 different federal agencies. I suggest you put the light down before things get complicated." The dramatic tension ratcheted up as Silas realized his world was crumbling. He didn't surrender, he panicked. He lunged for Maya, intending to use her as a shield, but he underestimated the speed of a SEAL who had nothing left to lose. Maya dodged the clumsy grab and delivered a precise strike to his solar plexus, sending the sheriff gasping to the floor. "You don't get to touch me again," she hissed. Outside, the sirens began to wail, but they weren't the local police. Huge black SUVs roared into the town square, the dust clouds illuminated by high-intensity searchlights. Federal agents in tactical gear poured out, their movements a choreographed dance of power. But through the noise and the light, a different sound cut through, a low, rhythmic barking from the woods behind the station. It was Kratos, signaling his position. He had intercepted a deputy trying to flee with a bag of cash and evidence. Maya walked out of the station, her silhouette framed by the flickering emergency lights. The townspeople stood in a semicircle, watching as the man who had bullied them for a decade was led out in chains, his face pale and his swagger gone. Maggie, the diner owner, stepped forward, her eyes wet with tears. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice trembling. Maya looked at her, then at the federal agents securing the scene. "For him, yes. For you, it's just beginning." At that moment, Kratos emerged from the tree line, his tail held high, trotting toward Maya with a piece of a deputy's uniform still snagged in his teeth. He let out a sharp, joyful bark and leaned his weight against her leg, his 75-pound frame a steady anchor in the swirling chaos. Maya knelt and buried her face in his neck, the scent of smoke and fur the only thing that felt real. "You did it, buddy," she whispered. "You stayed." But as the federal lead agent approached Maya, his face was grim. He's not celebratory. "Commander Vance, we have a problem," he said, holding up a tablet. Silas wasn't working alone. The money trail doesn't stop at the county line. It goes all the way to the state capitol, and they know you've compromised the network. A major cliffhanger settled over the square as a second set of sirens, louder and more aggressive, began to approach from the highway. These weren't federal agents. They were state police units, and they weren't stopping to talk. Maya looked at Kratos, then at the mountains. The hunter had become the hunted again, but this time, the enemy had an army. "Load up," Maya told her team, her eyes turning back into the hard flint of a warrior. "The party's over. Now we go to work." Kratos jumped into the back of the truck before she even finished the sentence, his eyes already scanning the horizon for the next threat, his loyalty as unbreakable as the steel of Maya's resolve. The roar of the state police sirens grew into a deafening wall of sound, turning the victory in the town square into a chilling realization that the rot went far deeper than a small-town sheriff. Maya didn't hesitate. She grabbed the door of her Ford pickup, her muscles coiled with the muscle memory of 100 extractions. "Bravo 6! They aren't coming to hand over paperwork!" she yelled over the mounting noise. Her eyes locked on the approaching high beams that flickered like predatory eyes through the mountain mist. Kratos was already in the bed of the truck, his claws scratching against the metal as he paced, his nose catching the sharp, acrid scent of ozone and impending violence. The federal agent who had just delivered the grim news looked at his tablet, his face ghostly white in its glow. "They've blocked the main highway, Commander. Like you're being labeled as an armed insurgent by the governor's office. They're calling this a domestic disturbance response." Maya slammed the truck into gear, the tires screaming against the gravel as she spun the wheel. "Then we stop being targets and start being ghosts," she hissed, the first mini-climax hitting as she veered the truck off the paved road and into the narrow, jagged logging trails that snaked into the dark heart of the Rockies. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through Maya's shoulder, a reminder of the shrapnel she'd taken years ago. But she welcomed it. It kept her grounded while her mind raced through tactical contingencies. Behind them, the blue and red lights stained the trees like fresh blood, refusing to fade. "They have thermal imaging!" Bravo 6 shouted from the passenger seat, his hands flying across a ruggedized laptop. "If we don't break their line of sight in the next 3 minutes, they'll have a drone lock on our position." Maya pushed the engine to its limit, the truck fishtailing near a sheer drop-off that plunged into the blackness of the canyon. Kratos let out a sharp, urgent bark, leaning into the cab window, his body heat a steady presence that countered the icy fear trying to take root in Maya's chest. He wasn't just a dog. He was her early warning system, and right now, his ears were pinned back in a way that signaled a threat she couldn't see yet. The first major twist arrived when a searchlight suddenly erupted from the sky, pinning the truck in a blinding cone of white light. A state police helicopter had bypassed the trails and was hovering directly overhead. "Pull over, this is the state police. Exit the vehicle with your hands visible," the loudspeaker boomed, the downdraft of the rotors kicking up a storm of pine needles and dust. Maya didn't slow down. "Hold on!" she screamed. Swerving the truck toward an abandoned mine entrance she remembered from her reconnaissance of the area. It was a gamble. A collapse would bury them alive, but staying in the open was certain death. The truck plunged into the yawning maw of the mountain just as a volley of non-lethal flashbangs detonated behind them, the sound echoing through the tunnel like a localized earthquake. Inside the mine, the silence was suffocating, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and Kratos' heavy, rhythmic breathing. Maya killed the lights, plunging them into a darkness so absolute it felt physical. "Check the uplink," she commanded, her voice a whisper that seemed to bounce off the damp stone walls. Bravo 6 grunted, his fingers tapping furiously. The feed is still live. The DOJ has the footage of Silas's confession, but the state-level intercept is trying to scrub the servers. We're in a race against a delete key. Maya leaned her head against the steering wheel for a split second. The weight of 12 years of service and 3 combat deployments crashing down on her. She had survived Kandahar and the dusty roads of the Middle East, only to be hunted in her own country by the very people who swore an oath to protect it. The irony was a bitter pill that she refused to swallow. "Kratos, sent," Maya whispered. The dog hopped out of the truck bed, his paws silent on the wet stone. He didn't head back toward the entrance. He moved deeper into the tunnel, jucked his tail low and vibrating. He stopped at a heavy steel door that looked like it hadn't been opened since the Cold War. "He found a way out," Maya said, her heart hammering against her ribs. They abandoned the truck, grabbing only their tactical gear and the encrypted drive. As they moved through the darkness, the sound of boots echoed from the entrance. The state tactical teams were moving in, their flashlights cutting through the gloom like knives. "They're using dogs," Bravo 6 whispered, his hand going to his sidearm. Maya felt a surge of cold fury. Using animals as tools of corruption was a sin she couldn't forgive. The dramatic tension peaked as they reached a ventilation shaft that led toward the summit. It was a vertical climb, hundreds of feet of rusted iron rungs and slick rock. "You first," Maya told Bravo 6. "I'm right behind you with Kratos." The dog looked up the shaft, his intelligent eyes reflecting the dim light of Maya's headlamp. He knew the stakes. He had cleared buildings under gunfire and dragged Maya to cover through shrapnel. A climb was just another mission. Maya rigged a makeshift harness from paracord, securing Kratos to her chest. As she began the grueling ascent, the sound of the pursuit drew closer. A German shepherd from the tactical team reached the base of the shaft, its barking frantic and sharp. Maya looked down, seeing the flashlights reflecting in the eyes of the other dog. "I'm sorry, buddy," she murmured to the animal below. "You're on the wrong side of this one." Halfway up the shaft, the second major twist struck. The rusted rungs groaned under their combined weight, and with a sickening crack, one of the anchors pulled free from the wall. Maya swung out into the void, held only by her left hand and the friction of her boots. Kratos whined, his 75-pound weight shifting against her, his claws digging into her tactical vest. "Don't move, Kratos! Stay!" she commanded, her voice strained to the breaking point. For a heartbeat, they hung there, suspended over a 100-foot drop. The psychology of the moment was a crushing weight. Maya wasn't afraid to die, but she was terrified of failing the dog who had given everything for her. With a primal scream of effort, she lunged for a higher rung, her fingers catching the cold metal just as the lower one plummeted into the darkness. They reached the top, gasping for air as they crawled onto a rocky ledge overlooking the entire valley. Below them, Silver Creek looked like a toy town, lit by the chaotic strobe of emergency lights. "We have a signal," Bravo 6 announced, his voice trembling with relief. "The file is 100% uploaded. It's not just on a server anymore. It's been mirrored to every major news outlet in the country. The governor just issued a statement, and he's claiming he had no knowledge of the operation and is calling for a full federal investigation." The big mistake Silas and his cronies had made wasn't just bullying a SEAL. It was forgetting that in the digital age, the truth doesn't need a highway to travel. It only needs a second of connectivity. But the victory felt hollow as Maya watched a fresh convoy of black vehicles, genuine federal marshals this time, roll into the town. The cleanup would take months. The scars on the townspeople would take years, and the nightmares that followed Maya home would likely never leave. She felt Kratos press his head against her hand, his warm, steady presence an anchor in the aftermath of the storm. He licked the salt and grime from her palm, a simple gesture of unconditional love that outweighed all the medals and commendations in her locker. As the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the peaks in shades of bruised purple and gold, Maya realized they couldn't go back to the truck or the cabin. They were officially off the grid. "Where to now, Commander?" Bravo 6 asked, packing his laptop. Maya looked at Kratos, whose eyes were fixed on the vast, open wilderness ahead. The mountains stretched out forever, a place where the noise could finally grow quiet. "We keep moving," Maya said, her voice reclaiming its steady iron core. "There are other towns like Silver Creek, other people who can't protect themselves, and we still have a lot of work to do." She didn't look back at the chaos below. She walked into the trees, the Navy SEAL and her dog disappearing into the shadows of the high country, leaving behind a shattered conspiracy and a legend that would be whispered in the diners of Colorado for generations. The final hook settled as Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket, a restricted number. She answered, hearing only a single sentence before the line went dead. The governor wasn't the top of the chain. "Maya, run." The wind howled through the pines, carrying with it the cold promise that the war wasn't over. It had only just changed fronts. Maya tightened the straps on Kratos' harness and stepped deeper into the wild, the silence of the forest closing in around them like a shield. The warning from the restricted number hung in the frozen mountain air like a death sentence, turning Maya's brief moment of relief into a cold, calculated state of combat readiness. She didn't waste a second asking who or why. In the world of special operations, once the top level of the pyramid starts to crumble, the builders come to bury the witnesses. Bravo 6 were compromised. "The federal response is a distraction," Maya said, her voice dropping into that terrifyingly calm register that had led teams through the valley of the shadow of death. Bravo 6 didn't question her. He snapped his laptop shut, his eyes scanning the tree line for the shimmer of thermal optics. Kratos stood perfectly still, his hackles raised, his nose twitching as he caught a scent that shouldn't have been there. Refined gun oil and high-grade jet fuel. The first mini-climax hit when a red laser dot danced across Kratos' chest. "Down!" Maya roared, tackling the 75-pound dog into a shallow ravine just as a high-velocity round shattered the granite ledge where they had stood a heartbeat before. The psychology of the hunt had shifted. They weren't being arrested by corrupt cops anymore. They were being liquidated by professionals. Maya felt Kratos' heart racing against her ribs, his breath hot and ragged, but he didn't bark. He knew the difference between a bully and a killer. "They're using a Reaper drone, but the cloud cover is giving us a window," Bravo 6 hissed, his hand gripping a suppressed submachine gun. "If we can reach the dense canopy of the Blackwood Basin, we can disappear." Maya checked her sidearm, her mind a whirlwind of tactical maps. "They want the drive, and they want us dead. We give them neither." She felt a surge of betrayal that burned hotter than any physical wound. She had bled for this country, only to find the cancer of corruption had reached the very heart of its power. This was no longer about a small town. It was a fight for the soul of the oath she had taken. The first major twist struck as they reached the edge of the basin. There's a team of 4 operators in unmarked tactical gear rappelled from a silent, blacked-out helicopter directly into their path. These weren't state police or federal marshals. They were cleaners, Private military contractors with no badges and no rules. "Contact front!" Bravo 6 yelled, opening fire to suppress the advance. Maya didn't engage directly. She released Kratos' tactical lead. "Kratos, flank!" The dog vanished into the underbrush like a shadow. One of the contractors screamed as 85 pounds of muscle and teeth hit him from the blind side, taking him down before he could level his rifle. The sheer violence of the encounter was a rhythmic, jarring symphony of survival. Maya moved with a fluid, lethal grace, neutralizing a second attacker with a precision that left Bravo 6 breathless. "We can't stay and fight a war of attrition," Maya panted, her eyes fixed on the remaining two contractors who were falling back to regroup. A hook for the audience landed as Maya realized the contractors weren't just following them. They were driving them toward a specific location. "They're hurting us," she realized, her voice tight with a new kind of dread. "The basin isn't cover. It's a kill box." They pivoted, pushing toward a jagged ridgeline known as the Devil's Spine. The pace of the story accelerated into a frantic scramble over loose scree and razor-sharp rock. Kratos led the way, his paws bleeding but his spirit unbroken. Every time Maya's boots slipped, she felt the dog's steady gaze, a silent command for her to keep moving. He was her anchor, her reason to stay alive when every instinct told her to turn and fight to the end. The dramatic tension reached a breaking point when they found themselves trapped on a narrow bridge of rock with a 300-foot drop on either side. The second major twist arrived in the form of a familiar voice echoing over a long-range acoustic device. "Commander Vance, give us the encryption key and the dog, and we'll let your technician go home." It was Silas. He hadn't been processed. He had been liberated. He was standing on the far side of the ridge, flanked by the cleaner team. He wasn't a broken man. He was a man who had been given a second chance to finish the job. "You really don't get it, do you, Silas?" Maya shouted back, her hand resting on Kratos' head. "You're a loose end. Once you kill me, you're the next one in the hole." She saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes for a fraction of a second, a mini-climax of psychological warfare. But Silas was too far gone, blinded by a decade of unchecked ego. He signaled his men to fire. "Jump!" Maya screamed. It wasn't a suicide leap. She had spotted a fast-moving mountain river surging through the canyon below, swollen by the spring melt. It was a 1-in-a-million shot. She grabbed Kratos, tucking his head under her chin, and stepped off the edge. The sensation of falling was an eternity of silence followed by the bone-shattering impact of glacial water. The current was a monster, pulling them under, spinning them against submerged boulders. Maya fought for air, her lungs burning, her grip on Kratos the only thing keeping her soul attached to her body. She felt him paddling, his powerful legs working in unison with hers. They were washed onto a sandbar miles downstream, shivering and broken, but alive. Soon, the realistic rhythm of their recovery was a slow, painful crawl into the tree line. Bravo 6 was nowhere to be seen, likely swept further down or captured. Maya lay in the mud, her body screaming in protest, while Kratos stood over her, licking the water from her face, his whine a low, mourning sound for their lost teammate. She realized then that the big mistake wasn't just Silas's. It was the entire system's. They had underestimated the bond between a warrior and her partner. They thought fear would break them, but fear was just fuel. Maya sat up, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the encrypted drive, still safe in its waterproof housing. "They think we're dead, Kratos," she whispered, her voice a jagged edge of iron. "Let them keep thinking that until we're standing in their living rooms." The final hook of this section settled as Maya saw a flickering light in the distance. Not a flashlight, but a campfire. And standing near it was a figure she recognized from a life she thought she had left behind. The war hadn't just followed her home, it had invited her old ghosts to the party. Maya stood up, her hand finding the hilt of her knife, as Kratos let out a low, warning growl. The silence of the mountains was gone, replaced by the heavy, thumping heartbeats of a conflict that was about to go global. She stepped toward the light, the Navy SEAL and her dog moving as one, ready to face whatever new nightmare the night had birthed. The mission had changed again. It wasn't about exposure anymore. It was about total eradication of the threat. Maya's eyes burned with a fire that no mountain river could ever extinguish. The flickering campfire didn't offer warmth. It offered a target. Maya stayed low, her fingers digging into Kratos' damp fur to keep him grounded as her mind processed the impossibility of the figure standing by the flames. It was Elias Thorne, a man she had watched a medevac chopper carry away in a body bag outside Kandahar 6 years ago. The psychological shock hit her harder than the river's current. She wasn't just fighting a corrupt system, she was walking through a graveyard of secrets. "Phoenix, I know you're there," Elias called out, his voice a gravelly echo of the man she once knew. "And I know the dog is thirsty." Jackie, step into the light before the Reaper drones recalibrate for the thermal signature of this fire. Maya felt a mini-climax of pure adrenaline as she stood, her hand never leaving her sidearm. Kratos moved with her, a silent shadow of lethal intent, his eyes reflecting the orange embers as he gauged the threat level of this ghost from their past. "You died in the desert, Elias," Maya said, her voice a jagged shard of ice. Elias didn't look up from the coffee tin he was heating. "The agency needed a ghost, and I needed a way out. But right now, you're the one who's haunting the wrong people." The first major twist unfolded as Elias tossed a tablet toward her. It didn't show the news. It showed a live feed of Silver Creek. The town wasn't being saved. It was being occupied. The federal marshals she had seen were a front, a private security firm scrubbed of all identification, and they were systematically rounding up everyone who had spoken to her at Maggie's table. The betrayal tasted like copper in her mouth. She had thought she was the liberator, but her presence had acted as a beacon, marking every innocent person in that town for re-education, or worse. "They aren't just cleaning up Silas's mess, Maya," Elias whispered, his eyes finally meeting hers with a haunted intensity. "They're protecting the node. Silver Creek sits on the largest encrypted data farm for the shadow network you just tried to expose." Maya felt a wave of nausea. Her big mistake wasn't bullying back. It was underestimating the scale of the hive she had poked. A mini-climax of realization struck. Silas was never the king. He was just the rabid dog guarding the gate. "I'm not here to kill you," Elias continued. "I'm here to tell you that Bravo 6 is alive, but he's being held in the sub-basement of the Ashford Ridge station. They're using him to trace the backup servers for that drive." Maya's resolve hardened into something diamond tough. She looked at Kratos, who let out a low, vibrating chuff of readiness. He didn't need a mission briefing. He felt the shift in her heart rate. "We're going back," Maya stated. Elias let out a dry, hollow laugh. "With what? A dog and a half-empty magazine? That's suicide." Maya stepped closer, the firelight illuminating the scars of service on her face and the ironclad discipline in her eyes. "I was a Navy SEAL for 12 years, Elias. I've led teams through hell when the map was on fire. I don't need an army. I have Kratos, and I have the truth." In a world built on lies, the truth is the only explosive I need. The pace of the narrative accelerated into a blur of tactical precision. Maya and Kratos didn't use the roads. They used the terrain like the predators they were. The dramatic tension ratcheted up as they reached the outskirts of Silver Creek under the cover of a pre-dawn fog. The town was a ghost of itself, silent and suffocating under the weight of the cleaners' presence. A mini-climax hit when they encountered a perimeter patrol. Maya didn't use her gun. She signaled Kratos. The Malinois launched himself from a high ledge, a silent missile of fur and fury, neutralizing the guard before a radio call could be made. Maya moved in, her movements a rhythmic dance of kinetic efficiency, stripping the guard of his comms and a high-yield thermite charge. The second major twist slammed home as they breached the station. Maya expected a fortress, but she found a massacre. Silas lay in the hallway, his chest riddled with rounds from his own cleaner team. They had discarded him the moment he became a liability. The psychology of the moment was visceral. Silas had sold his soul for a badge and a town, only to be stepped over like trash by the men he thought were his masters. Maya felt no pity, only a grim confirmation of the world she lived in. "Kratos, find Bravo 6, she whispered. The dog's nose hit the floor, his tail stiffening as he locked onto a scent. They descended into the sub-basement, the air growing thick with the smell of ozone and digital heat. A hook for the audience arrived as Maya found herself in a room filled with server racks that pulsed with a rhythmic blue light, the heart of the Shadow Network. Bravo 6 was strapped to a chair, his face a map of bruises, but his eyes were wide with a desperate warning. "Maya, get out! It's a dead man's switch!" he screamed. The mini-climax peaked as the lights in the room turned a blood red. The floor-to-ceiling monitors flickered to life, revealing a man in a high-end suit sitting in an office that overlooked the Potomac. "Commander Vance," the man said, his voice smooth and devoid of humanity. "You've been a remarkably persistent variable, but even a SEAL knows when the extraction is canceled." "You're the one who sent Elias," Maya said. She turned her hand hovering over the thermite charge. The man smiled, a thin, reptilian movement. "Elias was always a sentimental fool. He thought he could save you. I just used him to lead you here so I could retrieve the drive and the dog. Kratos is a masterpiece of military engineering. It would be a shame to waste him in a mountain collapse." Kratos growled, a primal, earth-shaking sound that seemed to vibrate the very server racks. He didn't see a masterpiece. He saw an enemy. Maya looked at the camera, her thumb clicking the igniter on the thermite. "You forgot one thing about warriors," she said, her voice a calm, terrifying promise. "We don't fear the collapse. We're the ones who trigger it." The dramatic rhythm shifted into a frantic race against a countdown. Maya sliced Bravo 6's restraints, while Kratos stood guard at the only exit, his body a shield against the incoming tactical team. Every second felt like a lifetime as the servers began to whine, the heat in the room rising to an unbearable level. A major twist occurred when Elias Thorne appeared in the doorway, not with a weapon, but with a bypass key. "I'm not a ghost yet, Maya," he shouted over the alarm. "Get them out, I'll hold the uplink." He shoved her toward the emergency ventilation shaft, the same one she had climbed days before. Maya hesitated for a fraction of a second, her heart breaking for the man who was finally choosing his side. "Go!" Elias roared. Maya grabbed Kratos and Bravo 6, pushing them into the shaft, just as the first thermite charge detonated, sending a gout of white-hot fire through the server room. The explosion was a mini-climax of light and sound that felt like the end of the world. They climbed with a desperation that defied gravity, the heat licking at their heels. When they burst onto the mountain ledge, the ground beneath them groaned and buckled. The Ashford Ridge station vanished into a sinkhole of fire and twisted metal, the shadow network's heart scorched out of existence. The aftermath was a silent, bruised morning. Maya sat on the rocks, her breath hitching as she watched the smoke rise from the valley. Silver Creek was free, but the cost was etched into the lines of her face. Kratos laid his head on her lap, his 75-pound weight a steady, warm anchor in the cooling air. Though he had seen her through the war in the desert and the war at home, and his loyalty remained the only thing in the world that wasn't for sale. Bravo 6 looked at the distant highway, where genuine federal convoys, this time with the correct signatures, were finally arriving to restore actual law. "What now?" Bravo 6 asked, his voice a mere shadow of itself. Maya stood up, her eyes turning toward the vast, unmapped wilderness of the high country. The big mistake wasn't just a story for a YouTube thumbnail. It was a testament to the fact that some bonds are forged in a fire that no amount of corruption can extinguish. She had her dog, she had her honor, and she had a new mission: to find the ghosts who were still waiting to be brought home. She didn't need a medal, and she didn't need a thank you. She simply needed the silence of the mountains and the steady heartbeat of the partner who had walked through hell beside her. The legacy of Ashford Ridge wasn't the fire or the arrests. It was the image of a woman and a dog standing against the horizon, unbowed and unbroken. They had been tested by fire, and they had come out as tempered steel. As Maya turned away from the ruins of the town, she knew that the world would always have predators, but it would also always have her. She tightened the strap on Kratos' harness, felt his lean muscle press against her leg, and stepped into the trees. Justice had been served. The debt had been paid. And the warrior was finally at peace because she knew that no matter how dark the world became, she would always have the courage to stand up and the wisdom to know that real loyalty never, ever retreats.